Are you strapped in? We're going to start with Tim.
All right.
We're going to get right into it. I'm so psyched. Let's go. Hi, Tim. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. What would you like to talk about today?
So we were part of that Infinity War stream over on non-sec almost 3 years ago. And we got stuck on a reformulation of a question a couple of different times about whether Christianity matches up to the world as it is better than any other worldview. And then you recently did a response to Braxton Hunter's 10 questions for atheists. And I think he was driving at the same question with question one is, hey, how does your atheism better account for the world as we find it than my Christianity does? That was the first time I've run into Braxton's channel, which has been kind of a trip for me the last 48 hours. I've been digging through some of the stuff of his that I hate and some of that I love. So I kind of wanted to dig into that question a little bit about whether that's even, because it's been almost 3 years, and my views have shifted a teensy bit about whether that's even a great way to approach, the question for evidence, whether there is a God or not, and if so, which God. And if it were, I'm not certain how we would formulate and generalize a question in a way where we could all get buy-in to the same formulation of what we're trying to discover there. So I kind of wanted to go into that a little bit.
Okay. Can I reiterate your question just to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly?
Sure.
You're asking, so the question as I understood it from Braxton was, how does atheism account for things that we can see in the world in a way that Christianity doesn't account for? And the point I made, I'll do it a little more succinctly here, was that atheism isn't a worldview. And Braxton, if you're watching this, I know you didn't say that. So atheism doesn't account for anything necessarily just by virtue of being an atheist. You don't formulate a structure, like a philosophy on viewing the world based on atheism. But he asserted, and what I was countering was that Christianity does account for things that we see in the world. But my counter was that you can't make predictive models based around Christianity that give you information about the world. What you can really do, if you're trying hard enough, is kind of retrofit things that we already understand into the text via interpretation. And even that's tenuous at best. Is that the question that you were asking? Like to reiterate that?
We had danced around at this a few years ago a bit too about about you guys trying to pin down whether you don't think there's a God, because each religion has a different way of accounting for these facts as well, and they're all inconsistent. And trying to get us to kind of offer why we think the Christian God can be proven as the one and only.
Right. Or that there would be any, because I don't think that you can make any predictive models based on religion. At least not reliable predictive models.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of why I'm even wondering if the question is a good one, and that's why I wanted to kind of dig back into that, because I think 3 years ago I would have said that's a very good formulation of the question. Mm-hmm. I'm not certain if I think that coming up with, I don't think I can come up with anything about the natural world as such that Christianity can predict better than a full kind of methodological naturalist worldview of some sort.
Right. And one step further than that is that, of course, there's Occam's razor, and Occam's razor doesn't necessarily say that it's the simplest answer is the easiest and therefore God. That's not what Occam's razor says. Occam's razor is about multiplying assumptions. And so what Occam's razor wants is that if all things being equal, which answer do you look at that has the fewest assumptions built on top of it? And so if it is a tie to say, oh, materialism explains everything and Christianity explains everything and it's equally well, Christianity assumes a whole lot of things that materialism doesn't assume. Because, of course, under Christianity, materialism is a subset of the supernatural, right? So, in my view, if those things come up a tie, then naturalism has to win. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I have a BA in philosophy.
So you could school me, absolutely.
Basically,
but
yeah. So basic logic. I just and I think I brought Occam razor up a couple of times in that stream we had together. So I just wanted to dig with you because I'm bounced this idea off of you guys.
Sure.
I think my response to Brankston and my response to looking back 3 years ago to the me and to the you guys of that previous stream is to say, okay, if we're just looking at trying to predict the world as it is, the physical world, the natural world, the historical facts, all of this, if that's what we're limiting our scope of inquiry to, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, there's a very hard time for me on the who, the what, on the where, the how, which are kind of the things that history and science and
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Tim. I want to make sure I'm following along with you because I think we're repeating things right now. So it seems as though you're agreeing with us that Christianity doesn't really make predictive models and isn't the best way of explaining what we perceive as true in the natural world. But you have an issue with the question. So that's what's interesting to me is you seem to think that that's a bad question. Do you think it's a bad question because there are things that are truths that aren't accounted for by methodological naturalism that you believe could be accounted for by religious, by theology somehow?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what I was trying to conclude that with. There's a whole bunch of why of kind of the moral impetus why questions that a theistic approach to the world at least attempts to answer, whereas I've never seen an atheist, You've
never seen an atheist attempt to understand morality?
Try to attempt to get to the deeper kind of,
What do you mean by deeper, though? I think this is where we're getting lost in the weeds a little bit, because it seems to me that you're saying to me,
I'm trying not to.
if I'm hearing correct, it's hard. Like, these are difficult questions to talk about. So it seems to me that you're saying to me that you're acknowledging that saying religion doesn't account for, like, religious texts and theology don't account for things that we perceive in the natural world, but maybe there are things that we don't currently have explanations for in the way of how we engage with each other. Like, because that's what morality would be, right? It would be how we best interact with each other, that you don't think an atheist could speak to without involving God in the answer. Why does God need to be involved in that answer?
Morality, purpose. There's a lot of Christians that are going to get hung up on those why questions. Why am I here? The kind of existential moral and existential personal angst questions.
Right.
I don't know if a naturalistic worldview. You
don't think psychology could potentially explain some of those things? Like how to cope with existential angst, or maybe why we have existential angst, and why that's something that we as humans feel as though we need to deal with and look to create models, whether they be true or otherwise, in order to account for, so that we can be more comfortable. You don't think something like that could at least, because if you're going to the why, there's two questions there. There's one, why do we feel this way? And then two, after you, which I think is the first one you need to address. And then after we address why do we feel this way, we have to address the cause of what's getting us to feel this way, right? Because you can't identify the cause of what's getting you to feel this way until you identify like that you have some sort of feeling. Or I could have been doing that backwards, but either way, there's two components there. And I feel as though from a naturalistic perspective, maybe you could explain it by looking at, our neuroanatomy. I like neuroanatomy and psychology. So we could explain why some people feel as though they have these types of anxieties that they need reconciliation for. And that in itself would explain religion to a certain degree to me, because creating models that alleviate that angst would be something that we would be driven to do. So that makes sense to me, as opposed to trying to do it backwards and saying we have existential angst because there is a God. We feel existential angst and maybe therefore constructed one in order to alleviate it. I don't know. What do you think, Paul?
Well, I mean, I guess I would ask you, I guess, do you think that there is such a thing as objective morality or objective purpose? And when I say objective, I mean that is absent a mind. So, like, if we take all the minds out of the universe, is there such a thing as morality? That seems like a weird concept to me, that morality to me is how sentient beings want or should interact with each other in order to achieve certain goals. Generally, because of biology, our goals are survival, avoidance of pain, and maximizing pleasure and well-being. When you look at those three goals, which are very biologically driven, it's very easy to explain why, hey, I don't like it when stuff is stolen from me. So maybe I can just imagine that you don't like it when stuff is stolen from you. And maybe we all do better when we don't steal stuff. Like, that doesn't really need anything ontologically bigger than those biological needs. Same with purpose. Someone would have to demonstrate to me that there was such a thing as a single purpose that somehow absent minds, exists. There's no evidence in the universe that says that the universe even cares that we're here, let alone that there is some single idea. Would you agree with? Do you think that there is such a thing as objective morality and objective purpose in those senses?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, that's really, having done what I've done, those are both very hard questions where I could come down on either side. I think that if there is an objective morality, it means nothing if there are no minds, and so.
Right. And also, doesn't that kind of terminate the Euthyphro dilemma too, if you're grounding it in God?
The way we're going to discover whatever the best moral thing to do is to treat it like we're having this discussion over subjective goals.
Right.
Like, and so the objective question is kind of superfluous to me on that. And so I'm stuck in a kind of a weird spot when I look at these questions, because I'm looking at these questions, I'm trying to come up with these things, and I'm like, there's something niggling in the back of my head about the questions, and then there's still my personal religious experience. But those are the big things. It's like, okay, those are those unanswered questions that I haven't fully sorted yet, and my personal religious experience are the two things that convince me God exists. And I kind of just want to suspend for a moment. My reaction to this kind of confluence of circumstances is I kind of want to stop questioning each other's motives and each other's approaches and each other's reconciliation of the worldview. I just want to dig down on what we agree on and try to start making the world a better place.
Right. Yeah. I agree with that. Sorry, I keep almost interrupting you, A, because of the lag, and B, because I'm excited. So I apologize, Tim. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. But I was like, maybe if you're looking to have the perspective of somebody like me, I could give you my reasons, maybe why I don't see it having a theistic grounding as a good idea. So first off, I feel like it all terminates at the Euthyphro dilemma, right? Like, is something moral because is it moral because God says it's moral, or is I'm gonna get it wrong because I'm not very good at philosophy, but is something moral because God says it, or does God say it because it's moral? That's where it terminates to me, is that the Euthyphro dilemma. And when we're having practical discussions about how we should engage with each other in the world, I don't feel as though what we should be measuring, or what is the best way to measure what is moral in any practical standpoint. And I don't even believe morality as an objective standard is a thing. I think it's just a system of behavioral standards that we strive to feel as though are the best fit for us to flourish within society. And when we're having these discussions and you're referencing God, you're instantly in the realm of them being prescriptive. And once they're prescriptive, we can no longer deviate from them if that is in fact the case. We can't even debate them. We just have to follow them. The very fact that they are up for debate and we can measure them against standards that we choose knowing what's best for us by analyzing them, knowing what's best for how we interact with one another, by seeing how societies have existed over time and seeing what did or didn't take. Those are the really important ways to have these discussions, not whether or not it's grounded in God, but what it should look like. And if you're having a conversation about what it should look like and you're holding it up against these types of historical standards and behavioral standards and psychological standards and sociological standards, you're already out of the realm of this prescriptivist view that says it's moral because God says it is, because we don't have access to that, right? We don't, if God says it's moral and it's not in the Bible, because I don't think you could really reference the Bible and be like, that's where morality comes from, because then you're going to have to start cherry picking and we're right back to it being subjective choices that we're making about what is or isn't best. So you're already existing outside of that by operating day to day. So the next step is just an acknowledgement that he's not necessary for morals. I don't even think you have to disbelieve in him for that, but you have to admit, when you look at it from that perspective, he doesn't factor in as necessary.
Yeah, and like, this is why I subscribe to your channel and Paul's, as well as to places on the other side that are more aligned with mine or more conservative in their theology than mine. It's like, I'm looking at this entire debate and I'm saying, okay, and my perspective has very much become, I can't escape the kind of the kind of flat reality that I'm convinced that God exists based upon a personal experience, based upon the fact that I'm going to keep on digging on these questions because that's who I am and that's what I've always done. But I'm almost convinced that I'm going to end up, leaving this earth whenever I do, still believing there's a God. But how does this? But I don't want to then make that in my interactions with either other believers of other faiths or with non-believers such a big freaking deal. It's like, I'm going to come at this religious text of mine, and as a gay evangelical Christian, and I'm going to say, okay, well, I know the God I've experienced, I know what's going on, but I can't impose this on other people because look at all these discussions we've had, and we come out at a point where we're down to personal experience and unanswered questions eventually become answered somehow.
Right. And Tim, I would also encourage you,
we may never get to them ourselves.
A lot of these things about like purpose and morality, all these things, essentially, when I've had these conversations in the past, they come down to, when you've had them for an hour and you continue out, it comes down to, well, how do you explain this intuition that I have, or intuition that I know that a bunch of us have? And intuition, I think you would agree, is not a way of knowing things, right? And so if you have an intuition...
It's not a way of knowing things we can use to make claims on.
Right, exactly.
I think it's something that we sometimes can't escape internally, but we can't use it as part of a logical proof.
Right. So if we all intuit that there's maybe some moral oughts, an intuit that there's a moral ought is not the same as demonstrating there's a moral ought, or an intuit that there's a purpose for me that is outside of myself is not the same as demonstrating there's a purpose for me outside of myself, right? So, for someone like me, I don't, someone says to you, how do you explain my intuition? Then I listen to someone like Shannon, who explains the neuroscience and the psychology behind, because we've evolved this way, because the chemicals work this way, and she can explain it way far better than I.
I think that's exactly what I would have said, because the chemicals work this way.
Exactly.
Verbatim.
Yes. Anyway, does that help at all, Tim?
I think it does. I think I wanted to bounce this off of a couple people I knew were intelligent, who sit on the other side, but I thought would have this kind of constructive
conversation. I'm sorry they're not here today.
I think my response
too bad. Sorry, it's us today.
Now is, okay, let's stop talking about these types of, at least from my perspective. I'll continue in the conversation broadly, but I think my rejoinder now, at least internally, okay, I'm going to believe what I believe, and I'm going to keep on digging, but let's stop. I'm not going to be quite as tolerant of the kind of broadside from either side of ridicule or anger or disbelief about people believing what they believe. And I'm just going to say, okay, let's get to the actual question at hand about how we make the world a better place and how we move forward in doing these things, it almost feels, freeing in some way. Like, okay, I'm not going to escape some of these core questions until I dig more, and maybe at some point we'll have a third conversation a few months or a few years from now, and we'll dig further. But I'm where I'm at now, and I think you guys have been very, very helpful in kind of digging into, from your perspective, helping me refine and hone where my next set of questions are as far as this conversation goes. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim.
I appreciate you calling. We are going to let you go because we have a lot of people have called in. So thank you, Tim. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see you later. Thanks for calling. Bye.
You too.
I remember him. He was nice before. I'm glad he called back. It's always nice to talk to people who are like respectful in engagement and are actually interested in like having a back and forth and not just saying, not just yelling slavery stuff at me. I just jinxed us. I just jinxed us.
And to catch up over time. It's nice. I think all of us, our ideas evolve over time, and hopefully we're getting better.